Hi, and welcome to the very last lecture in this course, which is how to write multiple choice questions. So as always, here are the learning objectives. Now, what I've done differently is I've incorporated that idea of success criteria. Okay, so if you can't remember what the other of those concepts are, go back and watch the relevant lectures on those. But what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit of the theory and about the underlying ideas of how to construct effective multiple choice questions, and then you want to apply that by creating two multiple choice questions to add to the pool of questions that everyone in this course are going to create. So what ideally we would like is one lower order question, one higher order question. We're going to pool all of these questions to create the revision test for you for the exam. And this is a strategy that you yourself can use once you get out there. Now, before we begin, what I'd like you to do is think about these three questions, because these are kind of statements which come up all the time whenever we talk about multiple choice questions within educational settings. So the first thing I want you to consider is, how much do you agree with these statements? Okay, so a lot, a little bit, it's really up to you. But what I'd like you to do is really to reflect on these and make a statement about where you stand on each of these statements. Okay, so the first one is multiple choice questions can only assess basic recall. It's just all regurgitation. Yeah, that's all they can do. The second statement is, well, multiple choice questions are far too easy and everybody gets an A whenever you include them in assessment. The third statement there is multiple questions, they're not a good way to assess. They're not valid or reliable from a statistical point of view. Okay, so pause. If you're watching this with another student, go have a chat about it, then come back to the recording. Thank you. Welcome back. So if you've considered each of these statements, my position on these statements is, they're not valid. Okay, so I disagree with these statements, because you can absolutely assess higher order thinking using multiple choice questions, and that's one of the main points of this lecture. Multiple choice questions are not too easy, and no, not all students get an A when you do multiple choice questions, and probably some of you experience that yourselves. That well-written multiple choice questions can absolutely discriminate between high-end students and lower-end students, and even down to the item level. And that last one there, so multiple choice questions, because they can be subjected to statistical analysis, can absolutely be checked for validity and reliability. Now, we don't go into anywhere near the depth required for that third statement there. You need to do a course on psychometrics, but we most will definitely talk about those first two statements, okay? Before we go on, so let's have a look at the various parts of a multiple choice question. So cast your mind back to all those times that you've had multiple choice questions in assessment. They will have this basic structure. They will have the stem, okay, which is essentially a statement or a question or a piece of stimulus. It's sometimes a picture, sometimes it's video, sometimes it's a fill in the blanks. There are a multitude of different types of stems that you can use, but essentially their purpose is to get across the point of the question, of the item. Okay, so there's the stem. Then underneath the stem you will have the options. Now, most common, you will have 4 options. Sometimes you'll have 5, sometimes you'll have 6. Doesn't matter the number, there will be a number that associated with each of the questions. But what is important is that there should be one and one only answer, and then everything else is what we call a distractor. So we have options that can vary in number, one clear answer with a number of distractors. Now, one of the things that we'll talk about later on is creating effective distractors that can help you discriminate between students on a particular item. Okay? So let's talk about the STEM. So in terms of the STEM, the simpler the better. So keep it simple, simple, simple. Always get a colleague to proofread your statements and really try and cut it back to as fewer words as possible. As much as you can, you should be absolutely considering the reading level of the student, tapping into key vocabulary that you have covered within the course and not mixing things up too quickly by introducing new language or new concepts within an item. And also, more importantly, that the STEM itself can be text, which is the most common, but it can be visual, it can be video, it can be audio, video, audio, visual, it can be a whole range of things. And hopefully what we'll do is we'll be able to demonstrate that in the items that we produce for that revision test, okay? So let's have a look at one of the major controversies about multiple choice questions is that this is the first statement, that multiple choice, you can only assess recall. It's just straight, that's all you're doing. You're just working all the way down here, not even getting up into the understanding level, because no, you can't do that with multiple choice questions. I'm here to dispel that myth, okay? Let's get started. So let's start all the way down the bottom. And yes, multiple choice questions can absolutely assess remembering. So just that straight recall, do you remember it? Do you not remember it? And so on. Now, hopefully what you can see is that I'm trying to, like obviously the answer is B, but then I've got the two distractors of C and D. Notice how C is kind of, starts with E, but then D really gets at the heart of, does the student really recall accurately Einstein's formula? Okay, let's move up level. Okay. Now, what's really important here, and tapping into the definition of understanding, is that the student understands the reason why. Okay, that is the true definition of understanding, is can you answer the why question? Okay, so quite often you'll see the word because, okay, because then the word because is the conjunction which denotes that an explanation is about to follow. Pause to have a look at how the distractors have been created in this particular item, because what you'll notice is that these two pair together and then these two kind of pair together, but they are designed to not overly burden the student's reading or in understanding each of the distractors. Notice how they follow a similar structure. That's kind of getting off the point of understanding. Let's move on to applying. Okay? Now this is where things get really interesting, because there's no way that you're going to be able to just recall the answer to this question. You must apply a formula. So you've got to recall the formula unless it's provided, and then you have to apply the formula. Okay? So already we can see that we can absolutely create questions working at the applying level. Anytime you've got a formula question, then you're working at the applying level. Let's move up a level. So analysing, remember, is about pulling apart something for examination. So the thing that they're pulling apart is this visual cue over here. So obviously, students have to understand the meaning of the arrows and the meaning concepts such as producers and consumers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, to be able to understand and then be able to interpret this visual to be able to answer the question. Okay, so you can see that you can absolutely create questions at the analysing level. Can we go further? Yes, we can. Okay, so evaluating, remember, is about determining the value of something. So in this case, it's quite complicated. Yeah, so because you've got brand A, brand B, you have to remember the formula for the cost price analysis. You have to apply that to calculate the cost price analysis, and then you compare. So evaluating, so you're figuring out what is the value, and then you're answering the question appropriately. Can you go to creating? Absolutely, you can go to creating. So this is creating, remember, is where you are having students create something new. Okay, and so what you're doing is presenting students with a scenario, and then getting them to imagine the scenario enough that they can create a hypothesis. Okay, so unless you've done this activity in class, this will be an absolutely new activity for the students, or you can just modify it to a context where the students are unfamiliar with it, so then it becomes absolutely true to creating. So it's not recalling some hypothesis that you had created as a class. It's about, here is stimulus, you need to create new right here, right now in the test. Okay, so hopefully you can see you can absolutely assess all the way up to the very top of Bloom's taxonomy. Okay, so when you come to creating your own, remember that the lower order is from applying down and the higher order levels are from analysing up. Okay, rightio, let's move on to distractors and writing good distractors. Now, good distractors, the alternatives must be plausible. Okay, so if you've got the question 5 plus 1, these are kind of silly distractors, whereas these ones are a little bit more nuanced here. Okay, so a student may see that 5 plus 1, but they might subtract, or they see the 5 plus 1 and just come up with the answer 5. Okay, so the more plausible your distractors, the more effective your question will be. Okay, now this is really, really good advice for multiple choice questions, and that you use misconceptions. Okay, because ideally what has happened in your science class is that you've used conceptual change pedagogy such as the POE to replace alternative conceptions with the more accepted scientific conceptions. Okay, so here you can see that what we've got are plausible misconceptions that people may have. You can use those. Okay? Next bit of advice, and this is kind of like relating back to when we had the question earlier about the states of matter. So the more similar you can keep the structure of the distractors, the less cognitive load there is on students understanding what each of the distractors, because remember this isn't a reading comprehension test, this is ultimately a scientific processing test. Okay? And so that, as much as we can, we try and reduce that reading requirement, that reading comprehension requirement, so that students can, so we get closer to the assessment of the student's actual scientific knowledge. Okay? So in addition to the advice that you saw earlier, here are some other things that you can do. Okay? Now, some people are still not satisfied that multiple choice questions can assess higher order thinking. So sometimes what they'll do is that they will have the multiple choice part, but then underneath have a space for students to actually write and explain themselves. Okay? So that's what we call in science education research a two-tiered test, and you can go and look that up if you want. But that is where you have an additional requirement for the questions to dig deeper into what students know. Okay? Now, what you can also do is you can run the responses through some analytical software, and it will tell you which questions are good at discriminating students and which questions are not so good at discriminating students. Okay? Now, that's kind of a bit of a level above, so be careful with that one because it does require some statistical expertise in being able to use the correct tests and interpreting those tests appropriately. Now, what I like to do is, rather than have all questions effectively discriminate between good students and bad students, for want of a better word, what I do is I have a bunch of easy questions, a bunch of mid-rate questions, and a bunch of really, really difficult questions. So that way I can then discriminate over the whole bunch of students. And just, it's a different approach to analysing and ensuring validity and reliability. In terms of the number of distractors, go for between 4 or 5, depending on age. Going beyond that, really, you don't get that much more benefit, and it's actually more difficult for you to come up with effective distractors. Okay? And also, writing good multiple choice questions is just a good skill to add to your teaching toolkit, because it is just another way that we can assess students, and you get nice, neat data that you can analyse if you want. There are so many benefits to using multiple choice questions. Okay? So circling back to the learning objective and success criteria. So here is the success criteria using the 3-star system for this task. So remember, what I'd like you to do is to write 2 multiple choice questions based on the content which was covered in earlier lectures. Okay? So, and what I would like is a lower order and a higher order, and I'll be posting in Teams where to post those questions. Okay? Excellent. I'm pretty sure that's just the same slide. Thank you very much.